3 years together, 6 months engaged, and it took exactly 17 words during our wedding rehearsal for me to realize I was about to marry someone who saw me as nothing more than a convenient placeholder. When Jessica looked me in the eye in front of 50 guests and said I was worthless compared to what her family expected, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply took off my engagement ring, placed it on the altar, and walked out of that country club forever. What she didn't know was that walking away would become the best decision of my entire life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs were always they're glowing like neon in the darkness of my blind devotion. But love has a way of making you ignore red flags until they're waving right in front of your face during what should be the happiest moment of your life. I met Jessica Chen at a networking event in downtown Portland 3 years earlier. She was everything I thought I wanted: polished, confident, connected to all the right people in the city's social circles. Her father, Robert, owned Thompson Real Estate Development, one of the largest property firms in Oregon. And Jessica had grown up attending charity galas and country club events that I could only dream about from my middle-class background in Salem. Meanwhile, I was Emma Rodriguez, the girl who worked 2 jobs through college and clawed her way into a decent position at Creative Solutions, a mid-tier marketing agency. I was proud of what I had accomplished. But next to Jessica's effortless wealth and connections, I often felt like I was constantly trying to prove I belonged in her world. The first 2 years were intoxicating. Jessica introduced me to restaurants, where a single meal cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She took me to vineyard weekends in Willamette Valley, where her family had connections. Suddenly I was rubbing shoulders with Portland's elite. I thought I was living a fairy tale, finally getting the recognition and lifestyle I'd worked so hard to achieve. But fairy tales, I learned, often have dark undertones that only become clear when it's almost too late. The problems started small. Jessica would make little comments about my job, suggesting that marketing was cute but not really a serious career like real estate development. She'd laugh when I got excited about landing a new client, patting my head like I was a child who had just learned to tie her shoes. When we went to her family's events, she'd introduce me as Emma, my girlfriend who works in advertising, always with that slightly apologetic tone that made it sound like she was making excuses for bringing someone beneath their social status. I told myself she was just trying to help me fit in. I convinced myself that her suggestions to change my wardrobe, my car, even my hairstyle were coming from a place of love. When she started managing my finances during our engagement, claiming she could optimize my spending since her family had financial advisors, I actually felt grateful. Here was someone who cared enough about our future to take charge of the practical details. What I didn't realize was that Jessica was isolating me from everything that made me independent. She convinced me to decline a promotion at Creative Solutions because it would require more travel and interfere with wedding planning. She suggested I stop seeing my college friends because they were holding me back from growing into the person she needed me to become. Even my sister Maria noticed the changes, pulling me aside during family dinners to ask if I was really happy. But I was too deep in the fog of what I thought was love to listen. The engagement itself should have been another warning. Instead of proposing in a meaningful way, Jessica announced our engagement at her father's annual company retreat in front of 200 business associates. She didn't ask me to marry her. She simply stood up during dinner, clinked her wine glass, and declared that we'd be getting married the following spring. Everyone applauded while I sat there with a frozen smile, realizing I'd just learned about my own engagement along with everyone else in the room. But the real pattern of control became clear during the wedding planning. Every decision went through Jessica and her mother. The venue had to be Riverside Country Club because that's where all the Thompson family events were held. The guest list swelled to 300 people, 90% of whom I'd never met. My preferences were dismissed as not understanding the caliber of event we're hosting. When I suggested including some of my work colleagues, Jessica wrinkled her nose and said we needed to maintain a certain standard. The final 6 weeks before the wedding were a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Jessica had convinced me to quit my job to focus on wedding preparations and transitioning into my new role as a Thompson family member. Without my income, I became completely financially dependent on her family. They paid for my wedding dress, my hair appointments, even my daily coffee runs, always with subtle reminders about how generous they were being. Jessica's maid of honor, Jennifer Walsh, took particular pleasure in making sure I knew my place. She'd make comments about how lucky I was that Jessica was elevating me, while most people from my background never got opportunities like this. She'd suggest changes to my appearance or behavior with the sweet smile of someone who genuinely believed she was helping me become worthy of their social circle. By the time we reached the wedding rehearsal, I had been so thoroughly conditioned to doubt my own worth that I actually believed I needed to prove myself worthy of Jessica's family's acceptance. I spent hours practicing my vows, desperate to say something that would finally make them see that I deserved to be there. The rehearsal dinner was held in the country club's private dining room, with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. I wore the dress Jessica had selected for me, styled my hair exactly as her mother had suggested, smiled politely through conversations about real estate markets and investment portfolios that I barely understood. Everything seemed to be going perfectly until Pastor Williams asked us to practice our vows one final time. I had prepared something heartfelt about partnership and growth, about how Jessica had shown me a world I never knew existed. But when it was Jessica's turn, she looked around the room at all her family and friends, then looked back at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, calculating, and utterly dismissive. That's when she delivered the 17 words that shattered everything I thought I knew about our relationship and my own self-worth. In front of her father, her business associates, my own family members who had driven up from Salem, and the pastor who was supposed to marry us the next day. Jessica looked me directly in the eyes and said exactly what she really thought about the woman she was planning to spend her life with. Those words didn't just end our engagement. They ended my willingness to ever again let someone else define my value. The silence in that dining room stretched for what felt like an eternity after Jessica's words hit the air. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, waiting to see how I would react to being called worthless in front of 50 people who were supposed to celebrate our union the next day. My cheeks burned with humiliation, but something strange happened in that moment of absolute mortification. Instead of the crushing shame I expected to feel, a crystal-clear thought cut through the fog of 3 years of manipulation. This woman doesn't love me. She never has. Jessica was still smiling, that practiced smile she reserved for public moments, clearly expecting me to laugh it off or apologize for whatever inadequacy she'd just highlighted. Her father, Robert, nodded approvingly, as if she'd just made an astute business observation. Jennifer Walsh smirked behind her wine glass, probably thrilled that the mask had finally slipped in such a spectacular fashion. But I wasn't the same. A woman who had walked into this engagement 6 months ago, even though I hadn't realized it until this exact moment. Somewhere in the back of my mind, my college marketing professor's voice echoed, when someone shows you their true character, believe them the first time. Jessica had just shown me exactly what she thought of me, and I finally believed her. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the polished floor in the sudden quiet. My hands were steady as I reached for the engagement ring on my left hand, the 3-carat diamond that Jessica had selected without my input because you wouldn't understand the quality differences. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The ring slid off easily, as if it had never really belonged there in the first place. Pastor Williams looked confused, glancing between Jessica and me with obvious concern. My sister Maria rose from her chair, her face a mixture of shock and something that looked almost like relief. But I kept my eyes fixed on Jessica as I walked around the table to where she sat, still wearing that expectant smile that was beginning to waver around the edges. "Thank you," I said quietly, placing the ring on the white tablecloth in front of her, "for finally being honest about what you really think of me." The confusion on Jessica's face was almost comical. She'd spent so long conditioning me to accept her criticism and manipulation that she genuinely couldn't comprehend why I wasn't playing along. "Emma, what are you doing?" It was just a joke. Everyone knows you're sensitive about these things. That word sensitive had been her weapon of choice for months, deployed whenever I questioned her decisions or expressed discomfort with her family's treatment. But hearing it now, in front of all these people who had witnessed her casual cruelty, it lost all its power over me. You're absolutely right, Jessica. I am sensitive. I'm sensitive enough to recognize when someone claims to love me, but actually sees me as a charity case. I'm sensitive enough to notice when I'm being reshaped into someone else's idea of acceptable. And I'm definitely sensitive enough to know when someone thinks I'm worthless. The room was so quiet I could hear the gentle hum of the air conditioning. Robert Thompson's face had shifted from approval to alarm as he realized this wasn't going according to their family script. Jessica's mother clutched her pearl necklace, probably calculating the social embarrassment of having to cancel a 300-person wedding. "Emma, you're being dramatic," Jessica said, but her voice had lost its usual commanding confidence. "Sit down and let's discuss this like adults." For 3 years, that tone had worked on me. The suggestion that I was being irrational, that I needed to calm down and see reason, had always made me question my own perceptions. But standing there in that moment, I felt more rational than I had in years. "I've never felt more adult than I do right now," I replied. "Adults don't stay with people who humiliate them in public. Adults don't marry people who think they're worthless. Adults definitely don't spend their lives trying to earn love from someone who's incapable of giving it." I turned to address the room, looking at the faces of people who had watched Jessica tear me down and said nothing. "No. I apologize to everyone for the inconvenience of canceling tomorrow's wedding. I'm sure you'll understand that I can't marry someone who holds me in such contempt." My sister Maria was already standing, her purse in hand and pride blazing in her eyes. She'd never liked Jessica, though she'd been too polite to say so directly. Now she didn't need to. David Kim, my former colleague, and one of the few people in the room who actually knew me as more than Jessica's accessory, gave me a subtle thumbs up from across the room. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Jessica's voice rise in panic behind me. "Emma, wait! You can't just leave. We have a wedding tomorrow. The deposits, the contracts, the guests who've already traveled here." I paused at the doorway and looked back one final time. Jessica had stood up, her composed facade finally cracking to reveal the entitled, controlling person she'd always been underneath. Her family looked mortified, probably already calculating the financial and social costs of this public disaster. "The deposits are your problem, Jessica. Picked the venue, you chose the menu, you invited the guests. I was just supposed to show up and be grateful for the privilege. Well, I'm finally grateful for something you've given me the clarity to see what this relationship really was." Walking out of Riverside Country Club that night felt like stepping out of a prison I hadn't realized I was in. The Portland evening air was crisp and clean, nothing like the suffocating atmosphere I'd just left behind. My sister caught up with me in the parking lot, wrapping me in a fierce hug that told me everything I needed to know about whose side she'd always been on. "I've been waiting 3 years for you to come to your senses," Maria whispered. "So proud of you for walking away." As we drove back toward the city, I realized I had no idea what came next. I'd quit my job, given up my apartment to move in with Jessica, and structured my entire life around becoming Mrs. Jessica Thompson. But instead of feeling terrified by the uncertainty, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, excited about my own future. That night, staying in Maria's guest room, I lay awake thinking about all the opportunities I'd turned down to fit into Jessica's world. The promotion at Creative Solutions that I'd declined, freelance clients I'd stopped taking on because Jessica thought they were beneath us, the business ideas I'd shelved because they didn't align with her family's vision for my role in their empire. For the first time in 3 years, my future belonged entirely to me, and I intended to make the most of it. The next morning, while Jessica was presumably dealing with the aftermath of our canceled wedding, I was already planning my comeback. I pulled out my laptop and started making a list of everyone who had ever suggested I start my own marketing firm. By noon, I had outlined a business plan for Momentum Media, the boutique digital marketing company I'd dreamed about but never dared to pursue. Jessica had called me worthless in front of 50 people, expecting it to crush my spirit and force me back into line. Instead, she'd given me the greatest gift of my life, the undeniable proof that I deserved so much better than what she was offering. And I was about to show everyone, including myself, exactly what I was worth. 6 months after walking out of that rehearsal dinner, I was sitting in a corner booth at Tasty and Alder, celebrating landing my biggest client yet. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was dining at one of Portland's most exclusive restaurants, the same type of place Jessica used to take me to prove her sophistication, except this time I was paying with money I'd earned myself. Lisa Parker, my former boss at Creative Solutions, raised her wine glass across the table. I have to admit, Emma, when you called me 6 months ago, asking for freelance referrals, I thought you were having a quarter-life crisis. But this momentum, media venture of yours is impressive. Stealing 3 of Thompson Real Estate's biggest advertising accounts in your first year. It takes serious skill. I smiled, swirling the Pinot Noir in my glass. I wouldn't call it stealing. I'd call it offering superior service to clients who were being neglected by their previous marketing firm. What Lisa didn't know was that those weren't random victories. Every client I'd approached had been carefully selected based on intelligence I'd gathered during my 3 years in Jessica's social circle. I knew exactly which companies were frustrated with Thompson Real Estate's marketing division, which contracts were coming up for renewal, and which decision-makers felt overlooked by Jessica's family's arrogant approach to business relationships. The beauty of Portland's tight-knit business community was that everyone talked, and I'd spent years listening to conversations at charity galas and networking events where people assumed I was just Jessica's decorative girlfriend. They'd complained openly about Thompson Real Estate's outdated marketing strategies, their inflated pricing, and their tendency to treat smaller clients as afterthoughts. I'd absorbed every detail, never imagining I'd one day use that information to build my own empire. David Kim had been instrumental in my rapid success. As the creative director at a competing firm, he had connections throughout the city's marketing landscape and had been quietly rooting opportunities my way since the day I'd walked out of that rehearsal dinner. More importantly, he understood the politics of Portland's business scene and helped me navigate the delicate process of poaching clients without appearing vindictive. The key, David had explained over coffee during my second week in business, is to never make it about Jessica or her family. Make it about what you can offer that they can't. Focus on innovation, personalized service, and authentic relationships. Let your work speak louder than any personal drama. That advice had served me well. Instead of bad-mouthing Thompson Real Estate, I'd simply demonstrated superior results. When Cascade Brewing was frustrated with their generic social media campaigns, I created a content strategy that increased their engagement by 300% in 2 months. When Northwest Construction felt ignored by their account manager, I provided weekly progress reports and monthly strategy sessions that made them feel like valued partners rather than billing entries. My apartment in the Pearl District reflected my newfound independence. Unlike the sterile perfection of Jessica's family home, my space was warm and personal, filled with plants, books, and artwork from local artists I'd discovered at Saturday Market. I'd furnished it entirely with pieces I'd chosen myself, paying cash for everything to avoid the debt that Jessica had always used to control my choices. The financial freedom was intoxicating. For the first time in my adult life, I could spend money without asking permission or justifying every purchase. I bought expensive coffee because I enjoyed it, not because it impressed anyone. I invested in high-quality business equipment because it improved my work, not because someone else thought I deserved it. I even splurged on a weekend trip to Seattle, just because I wanted to see a museum exhibition, traveling alone, and loving every minute of my own company. But the real satisfaction came from watching Jessica's world slowly unravel as mine flourished. Through mutual connections and Portland's gossip network, I heard regular updates about the Thompson family's growing frustration with their marketing division's declining performance. Apparently, Jessica had assumed she could easily replace the clients I'd taken, but her entitled approach to business development wasn't yielding the results her father expected. Jennifer Walsh, Jessica's former maid of honor, had even reached out through LinkedIn with a thinly veiled request for job opportunities. Reading between the lines of her message, Seemed the Thompson family's business troubles were affecting their entire social circle. The woman who had once looked down on my middle-class background was now desperately seeking work from the same marketing industry she'd previously dismissed as beneath her standards. My sister Maria visited regularly, always amazed by the transformation she witnessed. "You're like a completely different person," she'd observed during one of our dinner dates. "Not that you weren't great before, but now you seem so confident, so sure of yourself. It's like you finally remember who you were before Jessica convinced you to be someone else." She was right. I had rediscovered parts of myself that had been buried under years of trying to fit into Jessica's mold. I was reading voraciously again, devouring business books and industry publications with the hunger of someone making up for lost time. I was taking risks in my work, proposing creative campaigns that the old Emma would have been too afraid to suggest. I was building genuine friendships with other entrepreneurs and creatives, relationships based on mutual respect rather than social climbing. The networking events I attended now were completely different from the stuffy charity galas I'd endured with Jessica. At the monthly Portland marketing meet, I connected with innovative thinkers who valued ideas over pedigree. At the Women in Business Breakfast series, I met other women who had built successful companies through talent and determination rather than family connections. These relationships felt authentic in a way that Jessica's social circle never had. One evening, while working late at a coffee shop in Hawthorne, I overheard a conversation that made me realize how dramatically the tables had turned to women. At the next table, we're discussing upcoming marketing campaigns. And one mentioned that Thompson Real Estate was struggling to find a firm capable of handling their luxury property launches. They used to work with some boutique agency, one woman said, but apparently the owner left to start her own company and took half their client base with her. Now they're scrambling to find someone who actually understands the high-end market. "What's the name of the woman who left?" Her companion asked. "Maybe we should reach out to her instead." I smiled to myself as I typed notes for my next client presentation. The reputation I was building spoke for itself. Word was spreading through Portland's business community that Momentum Media was the place to go for results-driven marketing that actually understood client needs. 3 weeks later, David forwarded me an email that confirmed everything I'd hoped for. Thompson Real Estate had put out a request for proposals from marketing firms, describing their need for innovative digital strategies and personalized client relationships. Exactly the language I'd been using to differentiate my services. From their previous approach, the RFP was addressed to marketing agencies throughout Oregon, clearly indicating they were casting a wide net to replace the business they'd lost. Reading through their requirements, I recognized every pain point as something I'd heard complained about during those long-ago dinner parties where I'd been ignored as decorative background. I spent the next week crafting the perfect response. Not to win their business, I had no intention of working with Jessica's family again, but to demonstrate exactly what they had lost when they chose to see me as worthless. My proposal outlined innovative strategies they desperately needed, showcased results from the clients I'd already helped succeed, and presented pricing that reflected my growing reputation in the market. When I submitted the proposal, I included a professional note acknowledging our previous connection, but focusing entirely on business considerations. I wanted them to see my name and remember the woman they had underestimated, now confident enough to potentially work with them as an equal rather than a supplicant. The response came within 48 hours, and it was everything I'd hoped for. The email from Robert Thompson himself was surprisingly humble. Gone was the condescending tone I remembered from family dinners, replaced by genuine business desperation masked as professional courtesy. He wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss Momentum Media's proposal, acknowledging that my firm had developed an impressive reputation in our market segment. I scheduled the meeting for the following Thursday at my office in the Pearl District, a deliberate choice that would force them to come to my territory rather than meeting on theirs. When Robert and Jessica walked into my sleek conference room, I watched their expressions carefully as they took in the modern furniture, the wall of industry awards I'd accumulated, and the view of the city skyline that rivaled any corporate boardroom. Jessica looked older than her 28 years, stress lines visible around her eyes despite expensive makeup. Her designer outfit couldn't hide the tension in her shoulders or the way she avoided making direct eye contact with me. Robert, meanwhile, seemed genuinely surprised by the professional atmosphere, as if he'd expected to find me operating out of some makeshift home office rather than a legitimate business headquarters. "Emma," Robert began, settling into the leather chair across from my desk. "I'll be direct. We need help. Our marketing performance has declined significantly over the past year, and we're hemorrhaging clients to competitors who seem to understand digital strategy better than we do." I nodded professionally, my hands folded calmly on the conference table. The market has certainly evolved rapidly. Companies that don't adapt to modern consumer behavior often find themselves struggling. To maintain relevance, Jessica finally spoke, her voice smaller than I remembered. "We've reviewed your proposal, and honestly, it addresses every challenge we've been facing. The social media strategy alone could transform how we reach younger buyers in your approach to luxury property marketing is exactly what we need for our high-end developments." The irony was delicious. This was the same woman who had once dismissed my marketing expertise as cute and suggested I didn't understand serious business. Now, she was sitting in my office, asking me to save her family's company with the very skills she'd belittled. "I appreciate your confidence in my abilities," I replied smoothly. "However, I should mention that my client roster is quite full these days. Taking on a project of Thompson Real Estate's scope would require me to carefully consider whether we're the right fit for each other." Robert leaned forward, clearly unused to being the one seeking approval. "What would it take to make this work? We're prepared to offer competitive compensation and a long-term contract." I pulled out a folder I'd prepared specifically for this moment. Inside were detailed case studies of my work with their former clients, complete with performance metrics that demonstrated exactly how much business Thompson Real Estate had lost to my superior strategies. I spread the documents across the table. Like playing cards, each one representing another victory in my quiet campaign against their empire. "These are some recent examples of my work," I said, watching their faces as they recognized client after client who had left them for my services. Cascade Brewing's social media engagement increased 400% after implementing my content strategy. Northwest Construction saw a 60% increase in qualified leads within 3 months. Riverbend Properties closed more luxury sales in 6 months than they had in the previous 2 years. Jessica's face went pale as she flipped through the case studies. Clearly recognizing the names and remembering the lost revenue each departure had represented, Robert's jaw tightened as he calculated the cumulative impact of my client acquisitions. On his bottom line, "As you can see," I continued, "my methods produce measurable results. The question is whether Thompson Real Estate is ready to embrace the kind of innovative thinking that drives this level of success." The meeting continued for another hour, with Robert and Jessica desperately trying to convince me to take them on as clients. They offered higher fees, exclusive contract terms, even equity participation in future developments. But I could see the desperation in their eyes, the growing realization that I held all the power in this negotiation. Finally, I leaned back in my chair and delivered the response I'd been planning since the day I'd walked out of their rehearsal dinner. "I've given this careful consideration, and I don't think we're a good fit. Your company's culture and my business philosophy seem fundamentally incompatible." Jessica looked confused. "What do you mean? We're willing to meet all your terms." I smiled the same professional smile I'd perfected over months of client meetings. "It's not about terms, Jessica. It's about values. My company works best with clients who respect expertise and value collaborative partnerships. Based on my previous experience with your family, I'm not confident that Thompson Real Estate is ready for that type of relationship." The silence in the room was profound. Robert's face flushed red as he understood exactly what I was saying without saying it directly. Jessica stared at me with a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension that her past behavior was now costing her family millions of dollars in lost business. "Emma," Robert said carefully, "if this is about personal history, I assure you that any previous misunderstandings would not affect our professional relationship." I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. "Hey, Mr. Thompson, this is entirely about professional standards. I've built my reputation on working with clients who value what I bring to the table. Unfortunately, I don't believe your organization is prepared to provide that level of respect and collaboration." As they gathered their materials to leave, Jessica turned back one final time. "You're doing this because of what happened at the rehearsal dinner, aren't you? You're punishing our entire company because of a personal grudge." I met her gaze directly, my voice calm and measured. "Jessica, I'm not punishing anyone. I'm simply making good business decisions based on past experience and future potential. Sometimes the best way to demonstrate your worth is to choose who gets access to it." After they left, I sat in my office, looking out at the Portland skyline, feeling a satisfaction deeper than any business victory I'd achieved. They had come to me desperate for help, offering everything they'd once withheld, only to be rejected by the same woman they'd called worthless. But this was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, I began implementing the second phase of my strategy. Using my growing network of business connections, I started spreading carefully crafted information about Thompson Real Estate's declining performance and outdated practices, not gossip or personal attacks, but legitimate business intelligence. Shared in the context of industry discussions about market trends and competitive positioning, at the monthly Commercial Real Estate Association meeting, I mentioned to several developers that companies still relying on traditional marketing methods were struggling to adapt to millennial buying preferences. During a panel discussion at the Portland Business Journal's annual conference, I presented data showing how digital-first marketing strategies were outperforming legacy approaches in luxury property sales. I never mentioned Thompson Real Estate by name, but in Portland's interconnected business community, everyone knew which companies were falling behind and which were leading the innovation charge. My subtle campaign of professional undermining was far more effective than any direct attack could have been. The results were swift and devastating. Within 2 months, 3 more major clients had left Thompson Real Estate for competitors who offered more modern marketing approaches. Industry publications began featuring articles about the importance of digital transformation in real estate, often using unnamed case studies that clearly referenced Thompson's struggles. Jessica tried reaching out through mutual connections, suggesting lunch meetings and coffee conversations to clear the air. I politely declined each invitation, maintaining the professional distance that protected me from any appearance of personal vendetta, while continuing to systematically dismantle the business empire that had once seemed so untouchable. The woman, who had once controlled every aspect of my life now, couldn't even get me to return her phone calls. The family that had seen me as worthless was discovering exactly how valuable I had always been. 2 years later, I stood in the ballroom of the Oregon Convention Center, accepting the Portland Business Journal's Entrepreneur of the Year award. The irony of receiving this recognition at the same venue where Thompson Real Estate used to host their annual investor meetings wasn't lost on me. As I looked out at the audience of 500 business leaders, I spotted Robert Thompson in the crowd. His face grim as he watched the woman his family had dismissed receive the city's highest business honor. Momentum Media now employed 18 people and managed marketing campaigns for some of the Pacific Northwest's most prestigious brands. We'd expanded beyond real estate into hospitality, technology, and sustainable development, building a reputation for innovative strategies that consistently delivered exceptional results. The company I'd built from nothing had become the go-to firm for businesses that wanted to transform their market presence. In my acceptance speech, I spoke about the importance of recognizing talent regardless of its packaging, about how the greatest business success comes from building authentic relationships rather than exploiting power dynamics. I talked about resilience, about turning setbacks into stepping stones, and about the courage required to walk away from situations that diminish rather than elevate you. Success isn't about proving your worth to people who can't see it. I told the audience it's about finding the confidence to bet on yourself, even when others refuse to place that bet with you. The applause was thunderous, but the real satisfaction came from knowing that Jessica was watching the live stream from her new position at a small property management firm in Bend, Oregon, after Thompson Real Estate filed for bankruptcy 18 months earlier. She'd been forced to leave Portland's competitive market for a smaller city, where her family name carried less baggage. The downfall had been swift once their financial troubles became public knowledge. My systematic client acquisition had created a domino effect that exposed deeper problems within their organization. Their outdated technology infrastructure couldn't support modern marketing demands. Their pricing structure hadn't adapted to market changes. Most critically, their leadership had become so insulated by privilege that they'd lost touch with both client needs and industry evolution. David Kim had kept me informed of the final collapse through his connections in the real estate finance world. Apparently, Robert had made increasingly desperate attempts to modernize the business, hiring expensive consultants and implementing rushed digital transformations that only highlighted how far behind they'd fallen. When their largest development project failed to attract buyers despite massive marketing spending, their creditors lost confidence and demanded immediate repayment of outstanding loans. The personal cost to Jessica's family extended far beyond financial ruin. Robert's reputation in Portland's business community was destroyed. His social standing evaporated along with his company's assets. Jessica's mother had been forced to resign from several charity boards when the family could no longer afford their expected contributions. Even Jennifer Walsh, who had once reveled in her proximity to Thompson family wealth, had quietly distanced herself as their fortunes declined. But perhaps the most poetic justice came in the form of career opportunities. As my reputation grew, I'd been invited to speak at business conferences, serve on nonprofit boards, and mentor emerging entrepreneurs. The same social circles that had once excluded me now sought my participation, recognizing the value of authentic success over inherited privilege. Last month, I'd been asked to join the board of the Portland Economic Development Commission, a position that would give me influence over the city's business growth strategies. The irony was exquisite. The woman who had once been dismissed as unworthy of a seat at the table was now being asked to help set the table for others. Maria had moved to Portland the previous year, accepting a position at a nonprofit that focused on supporting women-owned businesses. She'd become my closest advisor and confidant, helping me navigate the balance between success and personal fulfillment. During our weekly sister dinners, she'd often marvel at how completely my life had transformed. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd married Jessica?" she'd asked recently over dinner at Le Pigeon. I'd considered the question seriously before answering. I think I would have spent the rest of my life trying to earn approval from someone incapable of giving it. I would have built a smaller and smaller version of myself until there was nothing left worth approving. The truth was that Jessica's cruelty at that rehearsal dinner had been the catalyst for discovering my own strength. By calling me worthless, in front of 50 people, she'd forced me to confront the gap between how she saw me and how I saw myself. The humiliation had burned away my willingness to accept anyone else's definition of my value. Now, as I left the awards ceremony and walked through downtown Portland toward my Pearl District office, I felt genuinely grateful for that moment of public rejection. Without it, I might have spent decades in a marriage that slowly eroded my confidence and ambition. Instead, I'd built a life that reflected my own values and capabilities. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was short. "Congratulations on your award. You've built something impressive. I hope you're happy." I recognized Jessica's number even though I deleted her contact information. Years ago, for a moment, I considered responding with something gracious about forgiveness and moving forward. But then I remembered 17 words spoken in a country club dining room, and I simply deleted the message without reply. Some bridges are meant to stay burned, not because of ongoing anger, but because crossing back would diminish the distance you've traveled to reach higher ground. Walking into my office building, I passed the directory listing all the successful businesses housed in our modern downtown tower. Momentum Media occupied the entire 15th floor now, with plans to expand to the 16th by year's end. My name was etched in brass at the top of the tenant list, marking my place in Portland's business landscape. The woman who had been called worthless during her wedding rehearsal had built something that would outlast any marriage, any family fortune, any social position based on inheritance rather than achievement. I'd proven my worth not to the people who couldn't see it, but to myself, and that validation was the only one that had ever truly mattered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.